With the release of DBT02, every single ride line got some amazing supports. Some ride lines before were pretty decent already and just got so much better because of DBT02. Some ride lines were already really good in DBT01 and just got so much better just because of DBT02. Some ride lines stayed the same but just got just a bit better than before. And some ride lines just got new tools that they can work with in order to adapt into anything that the meta throws at them. We can safely say that DBT02 is a very amazing set. But for some reason, out of all the ride lines that exist today, there are still a couple of ride lines that really didn't change much even though they got new tools that they can work with. And one of those ride lines is Baromagnes. To be fair, at first when I saw the new cards for Baromagnes, I also felt that the deck won't change much. But still, over the past few weeks that I was playtesting the deck and trying to improve it in the ways that I want it to be, I found out that Baromagnes still has a lot of things it can offer. And he is just waiting for you to try it out. Hi guys and welcome to the circus. So here we have another deck profile for you guys. I've been wanting to make this deck profile for a long time already, ever since I found a new playstyle that I want to showcase. Because as I said before, Baromagnes isn't really just all about soul charging. Because of DBT02, you now have a few options you can work with in order to change your playstyle with the deck. The recent deck list that I've been seeing is pretty much the same. And to be honest, I was already cringing at it because every single list does the same thing, which is rush 15 soul. Every single card in the deck is all about soul charging, which isn't really the only thing that you can do with the deck. The main aim of the deck is to soul charge, don't get me wrong, that is absolutely true. However, how you soul charge actually matters. Some players say that this is like a glass cannon deck of some sort because it just has no hand cards because everything is supposed to soul charge, and then if it fails it doesn't really do anything, which isn't true. And today I will show you a different playstyle that you can do with Baromagnes, which in my opinion is one of the best playstyles that you can do. I'm not gonna explain every single card here because I already explained it a lot on my previous deck profile, so if you want to have some context before watching this, please watch that first. But I will still try to explain as much details as possible and possibly convince you that Baromagnes can still do so much more than just soul charge. And with that, let's take a look at my deck list. Before taking a look at the main deck list, let us first take a look at the ride deck. So the ride deck is the same as before, which is Uncanny Burning into Soniger, into Spartan, into Barrow. So it's the same as before because this is still the best ride line for the deck. I made a video before that I tried out the Diabol's ride line for Baromagnes. But as I tested it, I didn't really like the 2 less soul that it gives. The draw 1 on turn 2 isn't really worth it because it's a random draw. It's still possible that you can draw a soul charging piece, but sometimes you won't get one. So I still went with the ride deck that secures a Sonicer and a soul charge 6 on turn 3. And with this, let's now talk about the game plan of this deck build. So the game plan is still the same as before, which is turn 3 soul charge 10 and then reach 15 soul ASAP or at least on the second grade 3 turn. This deck isn't the same as most Baromagnes lists that I've seen personally, which is turbo 15, and that is where some players thought that Baromagnes is a glass cannon deck, when in fact it isn't. You don't need to reach 15 soul on turn 3. That playstyle is such a high risk medium to low reward. Like if your opponent knows that you will reach 15 soul on turn 3, they will most likely not put out units on the board. They know how to play around this deck now. So if you're still playing that way and your opponent knows the deck you're playing, they have the upper hand. Also on turn 3, your 10 soul Vanguard is already enough pressure in order to force out cards out of your opponent's hand. Your opponent only has 2 options they can work with your 23k 2 crits Vanguard. It's either they hard guard it or perfect guard it, or just take it and hopefully survive because you can still double crit. It's either they take more damage or they burn a PG very early, which is enough. It's enough for a turn 3 push. One of the best times to reach 15 soul is turn 4 onwards. Based on my countless testings, that is the correct timing to reach 15 soul. And luckily, that's what I've been doing ever since I got my hands on Baromagnes. Because turn 4 onwards is the time where your opponent will start to commit cards on the board. Because if they don't, they're gonna be left behind. Still, there are decks right now that can easily empty their board after their huge onslaught, like for example Bruce and Orphist. But with my playtesting, you will still have a pretty decent chance to win in those certain matchups. Next, let's talk about how many pieces in your deck that you want to have as cards that can soul charge. Yes, we are going to be talking about that because I find it to be really important. As I said before, this deck isn't the same as the ones that are pretty common to see, which is a deck that consists of purely cards that can soul charge. I have some pretty spicy techs here. So first, let's take a look at the cards that we have right now that can soul charge too. So we have Curtis, we have Electro Spartan, we have Crimson Expeller, and we have Abnormality Extraction and Brother Soul. So these are the current 5 cards that can soul charge too. I will consider Crimson Expeller as a soul charge too because depending on the number of turns that he stays on the board is the number of cards that you can soul charge. So he is not just a soul charge 2, but sometimes a soul charge 3 or soul charge 4 as well, depending on how long your opponent wants that card to stay on the board. These 2 orders are your main orders right now because they're just very cool, especially Abnormality Extraction. I will talk more about this order later. Spartan is still here because Spartan is an optional soul charge, which is very important. Expeller is just an amazing card overall, and this is all the cards that can soul charge too. So I'll bring up the question again. How many cards in your deck do you want to be cards that can soul charge too? It will still vary depending on your luck, depending on how much you're willing to commit to it. In my experience and countless playtesting, the number of cards that I want to be in the deck that can soul charge too is 15 or 16. Currently, I am running a combination of 15 cards with these 5 cards right here. And sometimes I still consider the Persona Ride and Selfish Engraver as cards that can soul charge too, or at least soul charge 1. I really want to share this because this means that not everything in your deck is supposed to be cards that can soul charge. Well, unless of course you still like playing the Turbo 15 build. If that's the case, I mean that's fine, you do you. But if you're looking to try out different tech cards inside your deck, I will highly suggest that you go for at least 15 to 16 cards that can soul charge 2 in your deck and you'll be fine. I say that number because again, the playstyle of this build is to reach 10 soul on turn 3. And 15 cards that can soul charge 2 is enough to consistently get 2 cards in your hand that can soul charge 2 on your mulligan. In my countless playtesting, I rarely brick with this deck. When I brick, I just open up with a bunch of triggers, and at least 90% of the time, I will reach 15 soul on turn 4 onwards. And at least 95% of the time, I will reach 10 soul on turn 3. Again, it depends on how you play the deck and how you mulligan. It depends on your habits as well. If you want to give this a go, feel free to do it. So this is the overall game plan of my build, but there's still just more details that I want to share that I can only share during the deck list portion of this video. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so let's start with the grade 3s. We're running the 3 copies of Baromagnes because the Persona Ride in this deck is very important in my opinion. Because in my deck list, I run a lot of grade 2s, and grade 2s just can't get over 13k base Vanguards. So a Persona Ride will really help. I do see some list that doesn't really run that much Baromagnes, like it's only running like 2 copies instead of 3. And I did that, to be honest, I did that before, but I just found that the Persona Ride is just really powerful. But feel free to cut 1 copy of this in order to just fit the playstyle that you want. Basically, the 3rd copy of Baromagnes here is a flex spot. You can make use of any card that you want in the current card pool that we have that you want to put in the deck in place of him. Next, 4 copies of Curtis, because Curtis is just an amazing card. He is one of the best cards in the deck as of now because first of all, Soul Charge 2 without any cost is just amazing. And his 2nd skill where you counter blast 2 to give plus 10k to the front row is actually used very often in this build. Because again, I run a lot of grade 2s in the deck, so a 10k base isn't really enough to get over 13. So that plus 5k to the front row will really help. Also, Curtis is one of those ways where you can use the CBs your opponents gave you when they rush you because it's still a viable strategy to work with. The only downside of him is he is a mandatory Soul Charge 2, which is sometimes very important to take note of. You gotta be careful on not decking out after you reach 15 soul. So that's it for the grade 3s. The grade 2s, we are running 4 copies of Crimson Expeller, or Expeller if you want that name. This card is just amazing. He serves multiple of purposes in this build. First of all, the mandatory soul charge on turn 2 onwards is just very powerful. Again, I consider him as a soul charge 2 or a soul charge 3 because the longer he stays on the board, the more soul charge he'll get. Sometimes your opponent just runs over this because they don't want you to farm soul. Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes you want to guard it because sometimes you just lack that one soul. He is just an amazing card going first because he will enable you to do a grade 2 turn. In DBT01, Baromagnes doesn't really have a grade 2 turn. It's really hard to make one because the only cards that can enable to do that are other copies of Spartan in your main deck or your Selfish Engraver, which are sometimes not really worth it to put down, especially if you committed your counterblast because your opponent is now able to damage deny you. But because of Expeller, it just enables you to do that without any cost, and it's really cool. When you're going first, Expeller is able to hit over the Vanguard for 2 turns. When going second, his value drops down because then your opponent reaches grade 3 first, which makes Expeller not able to hit the Vanguard because his soul charge only works when attacking Vanguard. I don't really personally use his second skill that often because a 23k attack with 2 crits is already enough to force out a PG from your opponent, especially during the late game. But if somehow you know that your opponent doesn't have PGs in hand, the other skill of Expeller could be really useful. So keep that in mind as well if you want to run Expeller. And yeah, that's about it for him. Next, I am now running 3 copies of Selfish Engraver because this deck is now tight in space. But again, if you want to run the 4th copy, you can maybe take out the 1 copy of the Persona Ride that I mentioned before. But in my playtesting, 3 is enough because I rarely proc her first skill because your opponent can just guard this easily. They only let it hit if you are already on 15 soul just to burn 1 more card from your deck. I only use her on my 15 soul because I can then refund my counterblasts. She is still the best CC card in Dark States, but again, I can't really afford to run more of her. And 3 overall is just working fine on my part, but feel free to bump her up to 4 if you want to. Next, I'm running the one-off copy of Spartan, but I can only afford to run 1 of him because now I'm running less engravers, but he is still here because I still want cards that aren't mandatory soul charge on place, which makes him so much better of a target to call out from soul because he is still an intercept that can help you survive on your opponent's turn. Next is one of my favorite cards in the deck, which are 3 copies of Steam Artist Napier. Napier is just an amazing card. She just simply says if you have 5 or more soul, she gets plus 5k shield. She is a 10k intercept or guard in hand, which is very useful. The moment that this card was revealed, I was already convinced that I am gonna be running this on my Baromagnes build because I've always wanted a Brody for Baromagnes, and still a 10k shield is a very cool number to work with in order to guard those very awkward numbers. But aside from that, she serves multiple purposes in the deck. First of all, she is a grade 2 which enables grade 2 rush. Second is she is also a good card to put into the soul using Spartan's skill. So if you don't have Sonicers and you have Napiers, she will also be a good target to put in the soul and still be useful in the soul. Third is a good target to call out using your Baromagnes' 15 skill if you don't want to commit your Sonicers on the board, because there are situations where your opponent perfect guards your Vanguard while they are at 3 damage, and then you will call out cards from soul, right? Have you ever had that moment where you really don't want to call out your Sonicers because those are the only Sonicers in your soul, and then next turn they have the opportunity to snipe your win con? So if your opponent is still on a pretty good spot to take your last few attacks because those are the cards that will have the most power, you can just freely call out your Napiers in your soul, and since they're just taking it anyway, you now have 10k intercepts on the board while keeping your Sonicers in the soul, because calling out Sonicer on that situation is a waste. Pretty much everybody now knows the win condition of your deck, so if they have the opportunity to remove your win con, they will. So having another target from your soul is just very cool, especially if the card that you called will still be useful on your opponent's turn, which is where Napier comes in. Another note is that these 3 slots right here are your most flexible slots. If you don't want to, you don't have to run Napiers. Instead, you can just run the cards that you want. Like for example, if you want to run Freeze Breeze, you want to run Spherical Splasher, you want to up the cards that can soul charge 2, you want to up your Sonicers, you can do that as well. It also means that this particular playstyle of Baromagnes enables you to do so much more than just soul charging. There's still a lot of cards that are very useful for Baromagnes that really didn't get to shine that much because most Baromagnes players still think that the only way to go is to rush 15, which isn't the case at all. Next, moving on to the grade 1s, we are running the 2 copies of Sonicer. So again, you still want to have your win con in the deck, which are 2 Sonicers on the front row, which makes an amazing magic number, and it's just the main powerhouse of the deck. I did reduce his copy to 2 copies instead of 3 because again, I realized that I don't need to run too much of him, and I don't want to call him very early because I will just lose my win con. I still want to keep a number of copies in the deck that can at least be consistent enough to be soul charged at least randomly or to be fetched during the mulligan in order to put in the soul using Spartan skill. So 2 more additional copies in the deck is the soft spot in my opinion. Final grade 1s, 4 copies of the PG, which is, it's mandatory. Next, let's move on to the orders. I'm running 3 copies of Supernatural Extraction or Abnormality Extraction and 3 copies of Brother's Soul. I reduced the copies of Brother's Soul for the 3rd copy of Abnormality Extraction, but I found out that Supernatural Extraction is just amazing. Did you know that this card is a potential soul charge 4? This card single-handedly can enable 15 soul because if you have this on turn 4 and you are at 11 soul, which is gonna happen very often, Extraction just enables you to reach 15 soul at that moment because it will turn 1 card from your hand into a card that can soul charge 2 again, which are often gonna be Curtis or Spartan, which is just very cool. The moment that I realized that, I immediately ran the 3rd copy because it's just that good of a skill. But I don't want to run too much copies because it is a CB and a discard. Also, he serves multiple purposes. Like for example, if you are already at 15 soul and you don't need to fetch another card that can soul charge 2, you can just fetch some defensive units like the 20k shield fronts or even an over trigger if you soul charge the over trigger. And if you opened up multiple copies of it, you can just discard the other copies of the order and then fetch something good from the soul. If you happen to have like multiple copies of Curtis in your hand but you are already at 15 soul, you can discard those and replace it with something useful. It's a very flexible card, so it's really good to have in the deck. So trigger lineup is pretty standard. We are running 7 crits, 4 20k shield fronts, 4 heal triggers, and the over trigger. However, I did switch from the Dark States over trigger into the Cray Elemental one because it's just much better in my opinion. Imagine giving 100 million power to 2 Sonicers or 2 front rows. That is so good. And I realized that the additional 10k and crit to your Vanguard isn't really that much useful. Like a 23k and 2 crits is already enough pressure to force out a PG. An additional 10k and a crit doesn't really do much. So I'd rather have another skill, which is where this Cray Elemental one comes in. Which happens rarely to be honest, but when it happens, it's gonna be really cool. This is still arguable, so if you want to share your thoughts about it, whether or not I should run the Dark States over trigger or this over trigger, feel free to drop those in the comments because I would love to read them. And yeah, this is the main deck list. And now, in order for this video to be in the same format as my previous deck profiles, let us now proceed to the mulligan and game flow part of this deck. Okay, so let's now proceed to the mulligan and game flow part. Let us start by drawing 5 cards and let's see what we get. So yeah, looking at this hand, and it's it's still pretty bad, but it's fine. Okay, so when it comes to mulligan, it actually depends on whether or not you're going first or going second again. However, it will be the same as the one I mentioned before on my previous deck profile, which is you want to have 2 cards in your hand that can soul charge 2 and 1 card that you want to put in the soul using Spartan skill. In this case, we have a pretty dead hand, but we do have 1 card that can soul charge 2, which is Brother's Soul, and we have a PG and a bunch of triggers. So sometimes, if I already have 2 cards in my first hand cards that can soul charge 2, I am actually willing to keep at least 1 trigger. Because if your opponent knows how this deck is played, sometimes keeping a trigger can help you survive your opponent's rush during their first turns. Because again, rushing any Dark States deck is still a viable strategy, so you gotta be mindful of that as well. In this case, I only have 1 card in my hand that can soul charge 2, and we're still looking for 2 more cards specifically. In this case, I'm actually gonna mulligan 4 cards and keep the Brother's Soul, but if you wanna keep the PG, be free to do so, because depending again on the matchup, whether or not you're facing against a deck that can push you hard with big numbers such as Zorga and Orphist, if you're facing against a deck that has small pokes in the early game, you can keep a trigger in order to survive at least one of their attacks. Right now, we're not gonna assume an opponent, so in this case, I will just mulligan all 4 except Brother Soul and hope for something good. So let's see what we get. Okay, so we still have a lot of triggers in our hand, which is pretty bad, but we do have Selfish Engraver, so we now need one more card that can Soul Charge 2 and we're set. So I guess with this hand, we can work it out somehow, and let's see what happens. It's still Vanguard, you don't always have the best hand cards at the start. Let's just see what happens in the next couple of turns that we'll have if we can reach the 10 soul requirement on our first grade 3 turn. Okay, so let's assume that we're going first. So we draw a card to a PG. We are now gonna discard a card because it's overdressed. We are gonna be discarding the crit, riding on to Sonicer and Soul Charge 1. So Abnormality Extraction going down, but it's fine. Right now you can commit a Brother Soul, but sometimes it's okay to keep it. Given the amount of Brother Soul that I'm running in this deck, it's okay to not commit to it early game. You never know, you might check a defensive on the first try. So let's take a damage. First check a crit. So see, a crit goes down, meaning if they're going for a grade 1 rush, their rush shuts down, at least if they didn't check a trigger. Let's now proceed to our turn. Let's draw a card, another crit. So let's just discard the crit, ride onto Spartan, and then right here, we're not gonna do anything. Maybe we can use the Brother Soul right now, because if we draw into another Brother Soul, it won't be a dead card in hand. So cast the Brother Soul, Soul Charge 2. Why are there a lot of triggers right now? Oh my god. So yeah, that's pretty much an oopsie. So we're not gonna do anything here. So because we don't have Expellers in our hand, let's just swing for 10. Drive check, Abnormality Extraction, so that's good. And then right here, we're going to be taking some damage again. So check a heal. Bro, what is happening with these triggers? What the hell? Okay. I mean, that happens. That happens sometimes as well. You have to take that into consideration as well. And let's just proceed with 1 damage. But I would love to have another damage because we have Abnormality Extraction right now in our hand. And another CB for our Baromagnes skill. But if our opponent didn't check a single crit, this will be the case. And let's see if we can top deck something good. Let's stand in and draw, and then an engraver. Oh, actually, that's good. That is actually really good. That is okay. So discarding the crit, go on to Barrow, on ride skill of Spartan, and we're gonna put an engraver to our soul. Draw a card onto a Barrow. So that's really good. So Soul Charge 1 and an Expeller going to the soul, which is fine. And then right here, we're going to be doing something good. So let's take a look at our soul. So let's use our Abnormality Extraction first, because you never know what you're going to soul charge after this. So CB1, discard target. So discarding here, actually we're going to discard the front trigger. Even though I would love to keep the front trigger, I need to discard it because I don't want to discard anything here. CB1, discard a card in Soul Charge 3. We have a Curtis, an Appear, and a Persona Ride. We already have a Persona Ride. And we also have some options here like the 20k shield front, a Sonicer if you want a Sonicer to fetch, an Expeller if you want another soul charge, but I think the correct target here will be Curtis. Looking at our soul count, we are currently at 10 soul exactly. We're gonna Persona Ride next turn into 11. We're gonna be putting Engraver to soul to go to 12. Soul charging 2 more goes to 14, so we need 1 more card. And on the +3 that we'll get, we will most likely at least get 1 card that can soul charge 1. So we're set. So let's do that. Let's see what happens here. You know what? It's still actually an option to call down a Curtis right now because it's still a body. You're not gonna lose much if you just keep the Curtis in your hand because Curtis is not once per turn. What is mandatory here to call down is Engraver because you need the CC to use your Baromagnes skill. So I think let's go with that. So let's go ahead and start the battle phase with this board only. So let's swing for 10, assuming that our opponent guarded it because it's easy to guard and an on-hit soul charge 1. Let's put it to soul anyway and then counter charge 1. Let's swing with Barrow for 23k and 2 crits and draw a card on top of that. A Brother Soul, that is good. And then let's see for the Twin Drive. Right here, we're going to be making a scenario where your opponent will think if they're going to commit a PG right here, right now, or take the 2 crits and hopefully not get crit because it still happens, because it's the only 2 attacks of our turn, and sometimes your opponent needs CB, right? So it's either they take our engraver to let us farm 1 card to soul, which is going to be securing our 15 soul next turn, or take more damage using our Baromagnes skill. So we're not going to assume anything like that. We're just going to proceed with our turn for Twin Drive. Heal doesn't go off, let's say. Then second check a Sonicer, which is fine, because a Sonicer is still a good booster in the back lane to boost our grade 2s. Let's proceed with that, and let's say our opponent swings thrice again, a heal again, going down, a crit! Holy flicking hell, let's say let's take 4 damage or something like that. And then let's say we committed this to guard, and then let's proceed to our turn. So stand and draw. That's actually a good card. Okay, so let's Persona Ride, draw a card, and we got another Expeller. So let's see how many cards we have in our soul. So we have 12 cards exactly. We are going to be calling down the Curtis, as I said before. Curtis will now secure 14 cards and then 1 more card. I'm not going to use the Brother's Soul, actually. I'm just going to call this because it secures 15 soul as well. So we're exactly 14 soul, but Expeller will secure that, which is going to be really nice. You actually have some options here to choose from. Again, whether or not you're going to use 2CB to give plus 5k to the front row to make Expeller into a 23k attacker and Curtis into a 28k, or call down the Sonicer instead to make it a bigger number, or you can do both, because on your 15 soul skill, you have multiple of options to work with, and I will show you how it works later on. So let's actually proceed to doing it like this. You know what, let's use Curtis's skill to plus 5k to front row by counter blasting 2. And then right there, we're going to be making a very solid turn because we did Persona Ride. So we're going to be swinging for 28k, asking for 20k shield, exactly how much the new front trigger will provide. So right here, we're going to be swinging for 25, 35, 43. So that's a big number, which is very, very good. And then since we are attacking the Vanguard, we are going to be soul charging 1. There goes the over trigger, but that's fine. So let's see what we're going to do here. We're going to be swinging for, since we have exactly 15 soul, CB1, draw a card, and put everything to the soul. Let's see what we're going to be calling out. So let's see what options we have in our soul, depending on the situation. Again, as I said before, this deck can adapt to what your opponent has on the board at the moment. Let's see what options we have right here in our board. So let's see. Okay, these are all the options you can work with. See, there's actually a lot. So the optimal call is 2 Sonicers because it is your win con, but there are situations again that you don't want to call these because they will be sniped next turn, because there are a lot of decks right now in this current format that has a lot of removal without attacking, which is problematic to an extent. Keep in mind that you don't want to call Sonicers very aggressively unless of course you do want to finish the game right then and there. But if you don't want to call it down, you can just call out Napier. So we have a Napier in our soul, which is going to be a 10k shield. You can combo it off with an engraver if you want a CC, because we did use a lot of CBs earlier and you do need at least 1 CB for next turn to perform another Baromagnes attack. If you don't want to call Napier and you don't want to end up with some intercepts on the board, because there are decks that want you to have a unit on the board in order to perform very well, like for example Eugene and Dragonic Overlord. And right here, we can just call 2 engravers if that's the case to CC2. If you want maximum shield, you can call 2 grade 2s to serve as 15k shield. Depending again on the matchup, if you're up against Zorga, like for example, they're using Regurgitation, right? If they have a lot of grade 2s in the drop zone that they can call using that order, you can just call out grade 3s. You can just call out grade 1s. Or you can still call grade 2s but not end up ending the turn with them on the board. So you have a lot of options you can work with. Again, this varies depending on your opponent, depending on their situation, and depending on your situation as well. Which is very, very cool to work with, because it's not only about Sonicers and rushing 15, you can still do a lot of things with this deck. So assuming that our opponent did guard our first Baromagnes attack, they will be most likely sitting on 3 damage at this point, or 4 damage. They will definitely need to guard your Baromagnes, right? So you want to call down units that first, they are willing to take, and second, can be useful on their next turn because you know that your opponent can survive your turn. The best option here, on my opinion, is 1 Napier. And looking at our soul again, you not only have 2 Sonicers but 3. So you can call the spare Sonicer over here to serve as a big attacker. And looking at our hand size, we have 20k shield front, a PG, a 5k shield, and something to discard for our PG. We're still going to be drawing 2 cards. We can still take 1 damage, so I think that is enough, depending again on the opponent. But most likely and most of the time, it is enough to survive their turn. So yeah, let's proceed with that. This is going to be swinging for 38. This is going to be swinging for 30, so that's still a good number. Let's do our drive checks. First check, Electro Spartan. Second check, a crit. So let's give everything to our Deep Sonicer because it's the magic number here. And we still have 15k to 20k shield more to our hand to defend for next turn. At this point, everything in our hand size is now able to just be guard values. Depending on their damage, if they're at 4 damage, you want to swing with the 2 crits first, or you want to swing with 48k 2 crits. They will need to guard it or otherwise they'll die, and then swing with this for 1 damage but still fine and end the turn. I think this is still kind of a misplay because instead of calling the Sonicer, you want to call out a Selfish Engraver to CC because you don't have a CB right now. So let's not proceed to pretending that we survived their onslaught last turn. Let's intercept with this along with a PG discarding the Brother's Soul and committing a 20k shield front, and I guess this card as well. And then let's proceed with this, and let's say we took 1 damage just for the sake of it. Yeah, let's now proceed to our final turn, basically. Stand and draw. Look at our deck. Our deck is still pretty thick, and we're still gonna be lasting for like 2 turns. But our hand size won't, so let's now aim to end the game this turn. Okay, so let's now proceed with this. We're gonna be moving back the Sonicer here, call out this Spartan. And let's just proceed with this because a 10k doesn't do shit. So let's now proceed with swinging with our rearguards first. We're now going to be swinging for 28k, asking for 20k shield, which is very, very nice. And now swinging with 23k to crits, moving everything to the soul, draw a card, a Curtis, and calling out the 2 Sonicers. And then right here, we're going to be swinging for 23k to crits, and both Sonicers are 28, which is really nice. PG, and then Selfish Engraver, nothing. Assuming that our opponent doesn't have that much guard anymore because of our previous turn, we can possibly win this turn. So yeah, that's about it. This is how I play Baromagnes. This is the playstyle that I like doing, and I want to keep this playstyle because it's actually more fun than just soul charging a lot of pieces and hopefully not die because you don't have hand cards. With this build, you can play both offensively, defensively, tempo, and sometimes even rush if you want to, which is very well rounded in my opinion, and it's just really satisfying to play. So that was my Baromagnes deck profile for DBT02. Even though I feel like I've already said enough, I feel like I still forgot to mention some important details. So if you guys have some questions, some suggestions, or just anything at all that you want to say about the list, please just leave it down in the comments below because I would love to read them. And I also want to answer the questions that you have. If I can get the opportunity again to play it on a tournament, I would gladly play it because the last time that I went on a tournament with this deck, I got smashed twice Bastion, and both Bastions went first, so yeah, that was kind of an oopsie. It's also my fault because Bastion was one of those decks that I play tested the least, so that's pretty unlucky on my part, but it's fine either way. Also, if you are included in the majority of the people that aren't subscribed yet, just hit the red button down below, man. It's pretty easy. Thank you again so much everyone for watching. Together, let us raise the flag of Dark States, and I'll see you guys next time.